Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our cyber insurance webinar series. I'm Lonnie Huffer, Senior Product Marketing Manager with Trend Micro for cyber insurance. And with me today, I have the wonderful James Ingram, Cybersecurity Risk Engineer with Arch Insurance UK. And today, we are going to be talking about incident response from the insurer's perspective. So for those of you that have had the unfortunate pleasure of having a security incident, I am sorry, but hopefully you will learn something additionally today from James. And for those of you that have not yet, please take heed and listen to what James is about to share with us. So let's start talking about how insurers see IR. Um, you know, how does IR tie into those business continuity plans or disaster recovery plans? And I guess I say that because I'm wondering if carriers look at all three, or if you really only care about the IR plans. And when we are specifically talking about IR plans, and I know I'm asking you about 4 questions in this one question, what are some of the common problems that you as a carrier see in responding to an incident? And how or what was not maybe implemented properly with an incident response plan that the insured or the customer had?
So firstly, the plans are very difficult for insurers to assess because short of reading everyone's plans in depth, it's difficult because I think the lines have been blurred a bit between IR, DR, BCP plans, and they do all kind of, it's like the kind of Audi circles, they all kind of overlap in quite a significant way. And for us, knowing they're in place is the first thing. An incident response plan is that comes immediately into our minds because that's what you're going to be implementing. That's what you're going to be focusing on in the event of cyber catastrophe. Everything's gone down. How do you respond? But then, how do you then identify those business critical assets without a business continuity plan, and how do you maintain that continuity without that plan in place? And at the same time, disaster recovery used to be very much about cyber IT recovery as well, and that used to be in there. But we started to see quite a lot of that drifting into your incident response plan. So part of the incident response is the recovery. So there is a bit of a blend there. And if a client says to us, well, that's all implemented into the IR plan, we don't have a DR plan. But then as long as the process is there, we're happy.
Okay.
So next thing, what do we look for in these plans? Well, firstly, they're in place, but next we want to see them not just in place, but tested and really thought about as well. An untested IR plan is just going to be waste paper. You want to see that not only is it tested, it's tested with all the right people involved. It can't just be the CISO and their number 2 sitting in a room going, we'll do that. Yeah, that sounds about right. No problem at all. Throw it back in the cupboard. You want to see it run through with all the teams, bringing the board in when necessary, making sure that everyone's got the level of knowledge they need to react instantly. Those first 24 to 48 hours, if you can get your response nailed in that time, chances are your incident is going to be massively reduced at the other end. Whereas what we commonly see in claims, what we have is there's been, I think a better word than dithering, a slowness to respond and a lack of cohesion with the teams for that first 24 hours, by which time it's gone from being a minor incident to it being a enterprise-wide incident. So we want to make sure that we get a feeling it's going to be as efficiently responded to as possible.
So what is the best way for an organization to show you, the carrier or the broker, that they've tested it? And I know in the previous session, we talked about, bringing in the help of a breach coach to actually help you run through those types of incident response plan, helping you craft it better, customize it. But how are we actually showing you that we've gone through it? I mean, is it Is it a report? Is it just someone saying, yeah, we tested it on this date, da 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 da? What are you really looking for from that perspective?
The best that we've talked about in another call, the best way potentially to do it is use those comments boxes on your application, or just send a note to your broker to like say this is what we've done, and they will then transfer that to the carriers. But just say this is what we did, this is the scope covered. If you did use a rep, if you said we brought our breach coach in and we brought this third party in, name them. Say look, this is how great we are. We've done this, because it just builds a bigger picture of just, again, said this on another call, if you put yourself in underwriter's shoes, the more information you can give them about the level of depth you've gone into and the amount of care you've put into it, that's going to read great from their perspective.
Okay, perfect. And I was just about to say that too, because we have talked about it before. So use those comment boxes. With these IR plans, is there, in your eyes, do you see that type of information, or, and maybe I'm not going to say this the right way, but by running through that exercise, do you believe that there's an opportunity for the board or the CEO or whoever to kind of see a larger picture of what's going on and what they might still need to add to their security controls or procedures, whether it be additional technology or whatever, and then being able, as a CISO, for example, being able to procure additional funds to kind of do those things because of the results of what happened when we tried to run the IR plan.
Absolutely. I think a CISO's got two key powers to try and draw more money to their more funding to what they're trying to achieve, and that's the kind of the testing side, i.e. the pen testing, red teaming, those kind of things, those reports. But then the other side, it's these tabletops, these scenario-based things where there is a tendency to want everything of these scenarios to go right, and
right.
everyone wants to cheer the things that went right. Yeah, we did manage to do this, and it's good, but really the focus is the things that went wrong. And even if it's small things you can improve, you should be trying to improve them. And if there's ways that you can make things more efficient, and you can then justify that based on the business side of things, i.e. we can, by implementing a newer level control, implementing a different backup solution, whatever it might be, that's going to reduce our recovery by 12 hours, well, then they can put that into a financial terms for themselves. And we find that really does help with getting board sponsorship.
Perfect. Okay, so let's dive into the next question. So how do incident response planning and cybersecurity hygiene practices impact an organization's ability to recover from a cyber incident and demonstrate insurability to insurers?
So I think the first part of that is experiencing like the likelihood in the first place, and that kind of comes down to things that we've spoken about before in terms of having your controls, having them tested, having them as hardened as possible, and that's the controls, everything from the basics, your MFA, EDR, the things you absolutely should have, all the way through to staff training, making sure that the soft skills are done right as well. And at the same time, in general, the likelihood, I think, all comes down to, we see it so much in our claims, it's quite scary that if you've created a very cyber-focused business, if the board, if everyone else around you really understands your IT is critical, then the chance of the likelihood of a claim is severely reduced just because of that, because everything just works in a far more cohesive manner. So yeah, that from the likelihood side, that's what I would say. From severity, again, ignoring the kind of prevention stuff in terms of lateral movement protections, segmenting your environment, but more on a response to an incident, something's happened. The first thing, it kind of comes back to our first question, having those plans tested first, having them tested till they're tested to death, just keep testing them, because the more people have that in the back of their mind, the quicker they'll be able to respond. And those little issues that will come up, it won't be perfect, and you'd never have been able to scenario that exact issue, but the more different scenarios you've gone through, the more likely you are to find one that's close.
So I want to ask you a quick question about that. So you said test often. So what does that look like? I mean, for me, when I think about incident response plans, I would think being able to test it a couple times a couple times during the year, every 6 months or whatnot. But specifically, if I'm adding a new technology to my stack, or I would think that it would make sense to go through the exercise of testing your incident response plan again, or especially when you have new people onboarding in some of those key positions. I mean, that just makes common sense to me. But in the eyes of an insurance carrier, is there a testing timetable that you prefer to see, or is it really based on like organization or industry or size or something else?
All of the above. And you nailed it in terms of, once, twice a year is a standard, just turning the wheel, making sure that everyone's on board with it. But if there's any major changes, and this is where people fall down a bit, they conduct some major changes to their environment and then not test it for another 12 months. But those major changes are the things that people aren't really au fait with when something does happen. So any large-scale change in the environment, retest everything. At the same time, the scale of the scenarios and testing will probably affect the way we perceive them as well. Doing it 4 times a year, but very quickly whipping them out, having a round table in a room for an hour, that's not really good. Whereas a full-scale test once a year, where they are actually going all the way through to recovering systems, they're recovering to bare metal, they've everyone in the entire organization is involved. It's even involved downtime to the network, those kind of things. That we see that as a much more positive, much more realistic test.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to hop into question number 2 now, and that is when we kind of look at this, incident response as a whole. What are some of the common problems that you as a carrier see in companies responding to an incident, or how they've implemented their incident response plan?
Do you know what? I've actually got a slide. When we were talking about this earlier, I managed to grab a slide that I've used elsewhere for this. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
So these are just some really common mistakes that we see in how people have implemented their planning and their response. So the first one, it's the incident response plans are brilliant. They're absolutely nailed on. They've practiced them. They're ready to go. And then an incident happens. It's a massive ransomware issue. The entire environment's gone down. Domain controllers are gone, and they realise that all of the plans are stored in a document on their drive online, which they now can't access, and they can't get to it. So offline documents, USB stick in a safe, printed off underneath a table, whatever it might be, just not online is critical. The encryption keys in the very same way, wonderful backup solution, everything's ready to go, they are perfect, but the decryption keys for the on-prem backups that they want to use are held online and are now encrypted alongside the ransomware and are no longer accessible. So just thinking about the things that you would need, it's almost like turn all the systems off, right? What would we need to recover this? Can I access them without turning that system back on again? Is one of the key things. And continue with that theme, backups. One of the very first things attackers go after is your backups. They land on your network, and if they can disable, destroy, encrypt, whatever it might be, your backups, that you are far more likely to pay out, because otherwise it's probably your only way of recovery, short of completely starting from scratch. So protecting those backups by having an offline copy is key. This is quite an interesting one. We've seen this quite a few times. Luckily, we haven't been hit with this, but other carriers have, in that during negotiations with a threat actor, the negotiator will be trying to use all the tactics possible to try and reduce the price down. So they might say, oh, we want 20 million, and they might be going, all right, we'll give you 5, because and they'll be using all sorts of sob stories. The company's struggling, we don't have that money, we don't have those liquid assets, whatever it might be, to try and draw the price down. And we have had attackers then send a screenshot of their insurance policy, their cyber insurance policy, to say, well, there you go, you've got a 20 million cyber insurance policy, so give us the money, we're not negotiating. And so just be wary about, if you've got your insurance documents held online, keep them encrypted or keep them offline. It's something not to think of. Yeah. That's always tickled me, that one. Email being monitored. So you're in your incident response plan, you're following it down to the T, you're having those communications, the threat actors in your environment, and they're listening to everything you're saying, they're in the email chain. Or you're having Teams calls on the environment discussing it, and they're listening in on them, they're talking, that they're involved, whatever it might be, your method of communication, they're listening to. So just think about an offline communication capability. If your entire environment's down, you're going to need it anyway. So have a WhatsApp group set up. There are other communication services available, I should say. Have a group set up, have a communications, even it could be radios, whatever it might be. External IR team, we've had this a few times where I think hope comes into it. So you see an incident, things aren't going great, but you think, I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm just going to go and get the kind of the local IR firm. I'm just going to get, I've got a friend who has a couple of people who help do this every now and again. They get those in and they do their best efforts, brilliant people, best efforts for 24, 48 hours. And they go, oh no, I can't deal with this. And then you've got to pull in your big IR firm, the one that has to deal with this all the time. By which case, there's so much time gone. So just make sure, just be pragmatic about it. If it's a big situation, it's a major situation, get a firm in that's going to be able to really help you from the start, really. And that could still be a small firm. I'm not saying you have to go to the giants. Right. Small firms are still brilliant. Just make sure their capability is suited to the incident. Again, hope comes into the next one. We see so many applications where their RTO is based on it'll be an RTO of 4 hours, and then an incident happens and it's actually 32 days to recover, and it's incredibly common. The reason is,
and what does RTO stand for, really quick?
Recovery time objective. It's the amount of time that it should take to recover critical systems during an outage.
And so what you're saying here is people actually put 4 hours on their insurance application, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And a lot of the thinking is that they might have a backup data center, and they go, I know it takes me 4 hours to roll over to that, but in actual case, it's a hot site that's fully linked to the network, and the attacker's taken that down the exact same way they've taken down their main data center, their primary data center, or that they've recovered one machine and they know that takes 3 minutes, and they've just 3 times however many machines they've got, not realizing that you won't be able to pull that amount of data on your 2 meg connection you've got out to your backups or whatever it might be. It's just thinking about what it's going to be like at scale rather than your kind of best efforts testing. I've covered backups encrypted with no offline backups, exactly the same thing, ransomware getting in. And the last one's mainly based on companies with an OT environment, so your manufacturers and those kind of things. When they're dealing with their recovery and response, there's a habit to think that I can cut off my IT environment. My IT environment can be having all the issues in the world, but my manufacturing site will be fine and my business functions will be fine. And it never plays out like that. There's always more reliance on the IT, and it might not be actual reliance on the IT in terms of connectivity or direct communications, but it might be that all your stock ordering is done on the IT, and you've only got 1 day of stock. So once that goes down, you can't order anymore. It's just very basics like that. Just if you have an OT environment, truly, really delve into, right, that's gone. What can we not do now? So yeah, there's some highlights, I would say.
That I think those, I don't know how many bullet points are on there, 9, 10. That was some really interesting stuff, especially the thing about the insurance policy plans online. So for those of you watching this, if your insurance policies are online, saved in your SharePoint somewhere or Google Docs or whatever, please take them off and put them somewhere safe. So with that, I think kind of what you talked about really lends into question 3, which is where, I want to talk about preventative measures that businesses can implement to reduce the likelihood of experience a cyber incident and minimizing the potential damage. And so I think a lot of those things we just saw on the screen kind of lend to minimizing the potential damage. If your attackers don't know how much you have in your insurance policy, they can't use that against you. But if you've taken care with um, having backups that are not online or segmented off from the network or whatever other protocols you can add to that. So let's lean into our next question then. And my question to you is, so what role do cybersecurity assessments, pen testing, vulnerability management, or other types of assessments play in strengthening a company's cyber insurance posture and reducing risk exposure?
A huge amount. It really does. I'll start with vulnerability management. You mentioned that. That's such a key thing we look for, and that it's very easy to be quite passive with your vulnerability management. You buy a scanner, you let it go, and if it shouts at you, it does something. But once a month, you might come back and go, right, what needs patching, or what issues it found. It needs to be an active, engaged process at all times. So I suppose we split it out in 2 ways, because patch management folds into vulnerability management. But in terms of vulnerabilities across the entire organization, I think the first thing to say is clients shouldn't shy away from the risks. What we see quite often, it's very easy to look at something and think, it's probably quite difficult to exploit that. That's probably going to be okay, or it's quite difficult to get to, and they get shunted down the list of things they need to resolve, and then Murphy's law, that's the thing that gets exploited when they land on your network. So just be proactive and don't let things just sit there. So by identifying these weaknesses as well, you're going to be able to really it helps you build a picture to your board to be able to justify your requirements, saying, I need these additional layers of controls, these assessments, whatever it might be, additional funding, because I've identified these. Whereas if you try and give a glossy, nice picture about how well the environment is, everything's fine, you're gonna struggle.
Okay.
And that, firstly, and I always echo this every single time I speak to anyone, is that it all comes down to an asset inventory. Having a good asset inventory. You can't be good at vulnerability management unless you know what is on your network. Get that done first, then you can manage everything appropriately. Doing brilliant vulnerability management, but only having an idea about 50% of what you got on the network is close to being a waste of time.
Okay. I want to add something really quick to what you're saying too. So I know you're familiar with Trend Vision 1 and with the vulnerability prioritization we actually do within our platform. So when you guys look at, and I should say, I see part of that as vulnerability management, right? Because we're showing our customers specific vulnerabilities within their environment and prioritizing them based on what we're seeing at a global level. And so and you made mention to this, I guess from like a criticality perspective. Thank you. I know how to say that word. On how somebody might move it down, and we're already taking that into account based on what we're seeing globally across all of our threat intel and whatever. And so even though something might have a relatively high criticality score, our team knows that the likelihood of that particular vulnerability being exploited is very low because of how difficult it is or the amount of effort that's required to go into it. And so we move it down, and I believe we have two different scores that we actually have in our platform that kind of identify that. So for those of you watching, to James's point, that is information that is helpful to you as well when needing to speak to your board or to being able to secure more funds, because of what we're kind of showing in that environment. So we're tying into what the carrier might be looking at, but also giving you like another layer deep, to be able to maybe share that type of information with your carrier or broker as well. So with that vulnerability management or prioritization, if an organization, and I guess I should ask the question this way: do you as a carrier have a list on your side of like vulnerabilities that if you see, a potential insured has in their environment, that's going to be a hard no, we're not going to underwrite you unless you take care of it, or it's just a hard pass and you move on to the next person?
For us, firstly, I'd say that what you said about using the kind of threat intelligence as well, and then prioritizing, that is perfect. If people aren't using it, use it. It's such a key part. That comes back to the wider vulnerability management thing, in that it's not just going, that one's CVE 10, I'll go and patch that one first, forgetting about everything else. It's which one is actually exploitable, who's using it in the wider environment. And that's probably what we'll be looking for, in that we can only really conduct scans from an external perspective standpoint. So we'll see what's externally exposed, and we'll see the kind of devices that are externally exposed. We'll then look at potential vulnerabilities, and most of those will be the things we really care about are the kind of really high critical CVEs, the ones that are going to give you code execution, authentication bypass, those kind of things where that's going to give you a foothold into the network. They're the ones we care most about. But if we see large amounts of exposure, we'll ask a direct question saying, has this been mitigated? What have you done? And it might not be direct patching. You might think, I didn't need to patch that because my configuration says I'm not exploitable, or
Okay.
my friend XDR has taken steps to make sure this isn't exploitable by blocking that port or whatever it's doing in the background. So as long as we can see that it's been mitigated, and at the same time, what's great evidence for us is how quickly that was dealt with. If someone said, we had exposure log4j, and within 24 hours of it being exposed, all of them were patched or remediated, taken offline, whatever it was, a response. Whereas if we do a scan and CVE was released 2 months ago and they've still got it exposed, but we're going to be questioning why is that still exposed, and how come you haven't dealt with it yet?
Okay.
So that's what we look for.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go into our last question of the day. And I think it's an easy question, but you can let me know. And I think you probably already maybe answered this a little bit, but when we look at incident response plan, I mean, how important is it for an organization to have an actual IR plan, in the respect of them getting a cyber insurance policy?
2 words, very important. It's critical. I'm not saying you won't. It's like I've said when we've spoken previously. I can't speak for all carriers and all policies and everything, but in general, if you didn't have an incident response plan in place, you are going to struggle. And if you think about it from an insurer's perspective, our sentiment is very much aligned to the insureds. We want the insured to be able to recover from an incident as efficiently, as quickly, and as low cost as possible, because at the end of the day, we're going to be paying for that.
Right.
And there's no bad feeling about that. It's just we want them to get back up and running because it suits us and it suits the insured. It's great, win-win. So that's why it's so key for us. Without an incident response plan, it's going to be chaos, and the chance of you being able to efficiently recover is going to be slim to none. So kind of going back to what I said before, it's not just in place but tested as well. I think even if someone says, we've got it, and they've thrown it in a corner somewhere, we'll be kind of, a bit apprehensive, I would say.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So that's all that we have for you today. I think for me, some of the key takeaways that I have are definitely have an incident response plan, run it at at least once a year and do a full go at it. Don't just, half-ass it. I'm sorry for the language, but let's be real. We know how crucial some of these breach incidents can be, and we're just looking out to help protect you all. And so if you need to engage the services of a breach coach, please do so. They can really help you test those incident response plans to the limits and help you find the gaps and where you need to kind of strengthen your posture on some of those. Share with your insurance carrier or broker that you've run, that you've tested it, when you did it. Provide them the full scope of it so they can actually see what you're doing. This will benefit you because they're going to see an improved cybersecurity posture as well as maturity, and hopefully, that will translate into maybe a better discount on your policy. Again, it'll depend by carrier, but also, make sure you are, with that screen, with the bullet points that James pulled up earlier. Do not leave your cyber insurance policy online. That was a big one for me. I guess I didn't really think about it, but take it offline so those attackers don't have access to it. Think about the backups that you do have. How are they structured? Are they segmented? Are they not? Are they offline? Are they not? Because all of that is going to impact your time to recovery. And I think James pointed out a really good one. When you're filling out that insurance application and putting 4 hours, it's not 4 hours. I think the average you showed, James, was 32 days. So, please prep your entire team for that. It's not going to be hours, it's going to be days. And, the carrier is there to help you any way possible. And so, James, is there anything else that you would like to add before we leave today that I maybe missed?
No, that was a great summary. I think I would just reiterate that when you're building out these plans and you're testing them, be creative, be really creative, and think about everything. I mentioned something before in the last, and it's a conversation that's been going on recently at one of our last calls, in that think about the people as well. Think about everything, every minute detail. How are those people who are now responding? Where are they going to sleep? What shifts are they going to cover? How are they going to be fed? Just if you go into that level of detail, I guarantee you'll be much better prepared than if you could just created your IR plans just to prove that you have an IR plan. That's probably what I go away with.
I think that's a really great point. Again, those are things that, I would not have thought of. You've got people that are responding to a critical an incident, and God knows they may be awake for 48 hours straight. So, how are you going to feed them? Who's going to be that person that's doing that? When are you going to have food delivered? Are you going to have them sleep at the office? Are they going to be at a hotel in between all of these things? Who's going to take over their shift, when they finally crash? I mean, those are all really good points to highlight and point out. So if you all haven't thought of that, please go back to those IR plans that you do have and take those things into consideration. So with that, James, thank you so much for joining me again. I hope you all learned a little something in this session, and we will see you all next time. Take care.